reading stories of like impoverished downtowns where the communities like didn't even want to go to their own downtowns.
Right.
And how they turned themselves around by starting, one storefront at a time.
Yeah.
Right. Creating a sense of place where people actually wanted to be, which brought people to the town, which increased its vitality, which increased its business success, which made jobs for people, which put income in pockets, which solved people's problems. And now the same community began to thrive.
Right.
And, that was really by focusing on reestablishing local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were lots of examples of that. And it's a small thing, but I think that idea, because there's a lot more to it than that, but it really inspired me to say, I think there's something here.
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the show where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today we'll be coming to you from Concord, New Hampshire, where I am talking to James Key-Wallace. James is the Executive Director at the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority, where he helps to make capital and credit more accessible to entrepreneurs across the Granite State, or as some may call them, Granitepreneurs. We talk about New Hampshire's economy and the things that are going really, really well about it and the things that are going not so well about it. We talk about the things that New Hampshire does well with regards to regulating business. We talk about the many and innovative ways in which the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority is helping entrepreneurs across New Hampshire get their start. And I think we also talk about Turkish bathhouses for a little while. So we cover all that and a bunch of other stuff on this episode of Granite Goodness. I hope you enjoy it. James Key-Wallace, welcome to Granite Goodness.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you just told me something really interesting. There's all kinds of stuff I want to talk to you about, small businesses and availability of credit and the economy of New Hampshire, all these great things. But we might put all that aside because you just said that you used to work on an organic farm in Peterborough.
Yep, that's right. When I was young, in between college years, so for the summer, I would come home to Peterborough where I mostly grew up, and I worked at Rosalie's Organic Farm, which is a vegetable farm that also grows flowers. At least this is what it was like in like the late 90s when I was there, early 2000s, and they grow flowers and cut flowers. And I was there, I think, for 4 years in the summers and late spring. A farmhand, right? Helping plow fields, plant crops, harvest crops, weeding, worked in the farm stand.
Right.
It was great, actually. I would say it's my all-time favorite job, but I don't want to say that because this is my all-time favorite job.
It's supposed to be pretty cool too, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Well, they're not, I don't know how often, this comes across your line of thinking, but I was actually, the person before you on the show was Charlie Cummings, who does the Walden Mutual Bank.
Yeah, I know Charlie.
Yeah, and
sure.
he did Walden Local Meat before that, and I couldn't help talking to him, belaboring the obvious metaphor of like they give loans to small farms and innovative agricultural things across New Hampshire and New England, and I feel like your line of work is not that, like it's a similar line of thinking of how wrong is it to describe what you do at the New Hampshire Business Development Finance Authority as the gardening of local entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think you could definitely call it that. I think if you talk to anyone who's worked on a farm, all of a sudden for the rest of their life, everything becomes a farming analogy.
That's fair.
Which is basically what happens. And so that has happened to me.
Yeah.
When you grow vegetables, there's a lot of things that go into it, right?
Yeah.
It's not just plant a seed and water it. It's, the care, the nutrients, but it's also the soil.
Right.
New Hampshire's economy is very fortunate in that, if you're talking about the foundational soil of New Hampshire's economy, it's very rich. And that's why you see New Hampshire have, truly some stunning statistics.
Yeah.
Lowest childhood poverty in the nation.
Right.
Some of the highest higher ed statistics, people with, college degrees in the nation.
Yeah.
Some of the lowest, poverty. I mean, we have our problems. Don't
Sure.
get me wrong.
Yeah.
Lots to do. But New Hampshire's doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And it actually has for a long time. And it's in a unique place, I think, in the country. And people are starting to notice. You know, we get calls all the time from folks who do what we do in other states saying, how does New Hampshire do it? It's interesting.
Oh, that's so great to hear.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
What do you tell them? Like someone calls you?
Yeah. I mean, every state's really different, right? They have different challenges. So it's not like you can just...
graft what works in the Granite State.
You can't just copy paste, right? But there are some lessons. I mean, it's kind of cliche now, but I do think that, New Hampshire is considered to have kind of a relatively low tax burden for its businesses, which helps those businesses grow.
Yeah.
There's lots of arguments, and I'm not a politician or even close to it. Yeah. There's lots of arguments about who should pay what taxes and what's good and what's bad, right?
Yeah.
But there's no doubt that a low tax environment helps businesses thrive, right? Because they have more money to invest in themselves and their employees and in growth. And so the way New Hampshire's set up that way has served the business community well for a really long time. And I think that our government, and I came into this role from a non-government perspective.
Sure.
Right? I was always in the private sector. The government in New Hampshire is unique in its accessibility.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you can literally call your state senator from the number on the website, and they just pick up the phone like, hello?
Yeah, it's often their personal cell number or something, right?
It is. And the same goes for department heads. The same goes for the governor, right? I mean, and that lets people who have problems get to the people who can help them quick instead of being bounced around over and over and over.
Yeah.
And that kind of feeling, it makes people want to be here.
Right.
Besides the obvious practical, like, hey, it solves my problem.
Right.
It just creates a vibe that people really like. And that's kind of cultural to New Hampshire. Practical solution, small, quick, accessible. That's the kind of fundamental soil of New Hampshire.
The New Hampshire way.
The New Hampshire way. The New Hampshire Advantage, I think is what they call it.
That's right. Yeah. I do eventually want to talk to the people at the the economy or the New Hampshire. What's like the official state? They have like a Bureau of Economic Development
Business and Economic Affairs.
Yeah, that's them.
Yeah. Commissioner Caswell runs that department. He does a great job. He has said this multiple times, and it's always made an impact on me. When you look at the way other states kind of do economic development, you sometimes hear, come to Kansas. I don't actually know if Kansas does this, so I'm not picking on Kansas. If you have any listeners in Kansas.
If we have any Kansas listeners, we apologize.
But you'll hear, well, if I go to Kansas, the state will write me a big check for my business.
Sure.
They'll just whatever. And, we don't do that here. And as, Commissioner Caswell has said, we're one of the fastest growing states in the country. And you look around all these businesses we've worked with over the years, we haven't paid any of them to be here.
Right.
They all choose to be here because they think it's the best thing for their business. They think it's the best thing for their employees.
Right.
The way of life. It's really great. So that's something to be proud of.
This is like, you're just the perfect, this is exactly the kind of content we want for Granite Goodness. I haven't even asked you questions. You're very good at talking about all the New Hampshire Advantage and things that make us unique. And, I've been very interested to talk to you because, I think a lot of people have, and I'm one of them. I'm a layperson, right? I didn't study this stuff, but all these different perceptions of the economy, right? Particularly right now, there's all the statistics of, like if you ask a professional economist, a lot of them are saying, hey, look at, we're firing on all cylinders. This is going great. And then, you can ask a person who's not a professional economist, and they might say, man, I'm feeling the squeeze of cost of living, And so it's this fascinating kind of bifurcated reality. And both can be true, I think, at the same time, of like the traditional metrics of economic health can be doing well in our state. And that doesn't mean that everyone is feeling really wealthy all the time, right?
No. I mean, for all the good things that, I live in New Hampshire and I'm proud of. I mean, we're one of the most prosperous states in the most prosperous country in the world.
Right.
And yet
pretty great.
that we still have, homeless children.
Right.
Right. So obviously not everything's great.
Yeah.
Which is, inexcusable, really.
Yeah.
Right? So the way I think about it, and so I'm an economist, actually, right? And so
perfect. The
way that what we see, both anecdotally and in some data, about what's happening in the economy today. And we can talk about what is the Business Finance Authority? What do we do, by the way? We can talk about that, but
I want to get to that too. This is like my selfish, I'm very interested in all this stuff. And
Yeah. So, I mean, macro view, things are going pretty well, right? But it's not a monolith. And where we see the most struggles, exactly what you said, with inflation being what it is,
right?
Particularly focused in the cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of childcare, automobiles, insurance. I mean, these are the subcategories of inflation that are, particularly sticky, as they call it, right? Even as overall moderation has come down, overall inflation is moderated.
Yeah.
Those areas just really haven't as much.
Yeah.
And for folks who don't make a lot of money, like the categories I just listed are the biggest part of their budgets.
Right.
Right. Your rent, your food, your kids, and how you get around.
Right.
Right. And so, sure, economy looks great on whole, but for people like that, it doesn't feel too good.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the reasons inflation is a big problem, just a human problem. So, and we're seeing it. So across most banks' portfolios, because we work with, every bank in the state, right? Borrowers are in pretty good shape overall. We are seeing some softening, is what we call it. So a few more people being late on loan payments, but it's really constrained to kind of the folks who have the least wiggle room, right? So people who have the tightest budgets, the smallest businesses, people who are kind of lower down on the economic income ladder, and the businesses that are in the same way, or businesses that serve those customers. So kind of less expensive restaurants, less expensive hotels, retail, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those folks are actually seeing a little bit of a slowdown,
right?
Even though the economy overall is doing okay.
Yeah.
So, the question is, over time, will that weakness kind of creep up the economic ladder?
Yeah.
Or will it kind of just stay as a little dampening of consumer, kind of low cost consumer spending?
Right.
And the reason that's happening is because those customers are feeling the pinch.
Right.
Right. And I think they feel sometimes more accurately than the data might show.
Right.
And, if you're in a car and you're driving 60 down the highway, you're moving forward quickly.
Yeah.
And that's the economy, right? And moving forward quickly. When you hit the brakes, you kind of lurch forward and you feel that, deceleration, and you're like, ugh, it doesn't feel that good.
You can't be drinking a bottle of water.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't feel that good.
Yeah.
Now you're still moving forward, right? The car's still going ahead.
Yeah.
Right. So the economy, right? It's still going ahead. It's still moving. It's not in recession going backwards.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel good when you're decelerating.
Yeah.
And I think that's the feeling people have right now. And so it might not be in the macro data.
Right.
But people know what's going on. They can feel it.
I really like how you make all these issues human oriented, right? I think that sometimes as interesting and, again, we want to understand the world rationally, truthfully, and we need data and science and statistics and all these things, of course, to do that, right? But, for folks who are more on the layperson side of economics or all these different things, I think they may struggle to feel seen or heard when all they hear is numbers. It's like, well, who's talking about my kids or this or that? And anyway, I hear a lot of people communicate like these ideas about economics and stuff, and I think you do it particularly well, focusing on, making it human oriented, but also, accurate to the macro view. And it's a difficult thing to square.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I live it too, right? Yeah. I mean, I've got a kid. I see it. And it's just the way it is. Yeah. I mean, I'm not like want to harp on inflation or anything, but inflation is a hope killer, right? Because you just feel like your opportunity in the future is slipping away. Mm-hmm. And that affects how you behave in the economy.
Right.
Now, I actually still have a rosy outlook on where we're headed. So don't get me
This is
wrong.
Granite
Like
Goodness,
this is
baby.
right. Like
Yeah.
this is just, I think, to examine inward why you see a bifurcation in how the economy is doing versus how a lot of people feel about
Right.
how it's doing.
Yeah. I want to, let's turn more inward into the world of James Key-Wallace. Can you tell me more about the story of how did you get into all this stuff? How does a farmhand in Peterborough end up doing what you're doing?
Sure. So that was my summer gig. I don't want to like paint myself as like somebody who was picked off a cornstalk or something, right? Into the earth. But so my family moved to New Hampshire when I was like 5 or 6 years old, up from Gainesville, Florida.
Yeah.
I don't really remember it.
I'm from Florida too.
Oh, no kidding.
And
Whereabouts?
I also don't remember.
Yeah.
I was born in Orlando.
Okay.
And apparently I was shipped up here when I was 2 weeks old or something.
Yeah. I like vaguely remember parts of the drive up here because we had this really old brown Fiat. And this was 1986-ish,
Yeah.
so the car was older than that.
It had seatbelts and all that.
Yeah, it definitely did.
Airbags,
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
But it broke down like on our road as we were getting near our house.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I was a little, I don't know why, maybe it was out of gas or overheated. Like I have no idea, but I remember having to like wait and then eventually get to our house when it was down the street.
Wow.
But anyway, so we moved to New Hampshire when I was a little kid. And, I grew up in the Monadnock region of New Hampshire, which is a beautiful part of the state. Pretty normal childhood, right? Had friends, had parents.
Well, everyone says that, and then you learn something really weird about them.
Yeah.
So my hope is that some of that comes out.
I guess it was a big family. I have, there were 4 of us. And then, my dad remarried and had 3 more. So there were a lot of us. I guess that's unusual, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I grew up, went to college in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, at St. Mary's University. And I got my degrees in business administration and computer science.
Was that your first time leaving the country? Like, did you spend a lot of time in Canada before that?
No, it was not my first time leaving the country, but it wasn't like I had a particular connection up there.
Sure.
I think I had gone on a couple of trips growing up.
Yeah.
Like Niagara Falls, seeing the other side of the falls, and that kind of thing up there. But, that was about it. I honestly went because they were the only school who accepted me. No offense, Keene State, who turned me down. But,
Keene's great. We love it. Yeah.
No hard feelings. I, love the university system actually. But they accepted me, and so off I went, and had a great 4 years. And I always kind of knew that I was interested in how businesses can help achieve kind of the common good.
Right.
Right. I didn't really know how, but that idea was always, as a kid, appealing to me. I got the computer science degree at the same time because I grew up around computers. My dad was into computers. I just liked computers.
Yeah.
But I kind of knew I wasn't going to go into anything to do with computers. But it was too late. So I finished that. So I got the business degree, came back to Peterborough, and I worked at a company called Staff Development for Educators. Basically, like my girlfriend at the time, like her dad was friends with the co-founder, and they're like, "You give this kid a chance," kind of deal.
The dog walker is the girlfriend's.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was it's still around, very cool company, and what they did was, or do, is, do you remember like in school how there'd be a professional development day or a teacher workshop day, and we would have the day off as kids?
Yeah.
And we were like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So teachers have periodic opportunities to learn new ways to teach students. Oh. And so this company helped deliver those new techniques. Like,
I always wondered what they did on those days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a teacher, and I'm no expert by any means, but, you've got a room full of kids who are, all over the place, and they're, the way they learn, how they've come to the classroom, the expectations for when they leave. So, how do you reach these kids where they are in the best way that you can? And so there's always new, ways to try and do that. So they're learning how to do that, to do the best job for our kids. So that company would help teach those teachers how to teach our kids.
Yeah.
So I worked for them for like 3 years or so.
Yeah.
In different kind of entry-level positions, and it was a very cool kind of socially oriented company. And at the same time, I went back and got my master's in community economics. And once I finished that, I got into the economic development field as kind of an outcropping of that.
So this, I'm very interested in this through line of, you deciding to really specialize in this field, taking this kind of, younger kind of belief or orientation you had around businesses and the common good, and the relationship between those things. I do kind of want to tease out, right? Like, are there any specific memories or examples, right? And to give you context for I'm asking this, I think a lot of younger people today, they can have kind of a cynical view of business, or anything corporate. I think more the word corporate is a turnoff for a lot of people. And I don't know that they have the exposure to it. Like, for me growing up, business was always, most businesses, as you know, are small businesses, right? They're the literal backbone of the economy. And
absolutely,
when I think of business, fundamentally, it's really your neighbors, it's people in the community. It's, the tradespeople and, painters and like all it's the whole enchilada of the economy, and everyone has a relationship to it. And like, it really is the most human oriented thing fundamentally, but some people, they don't think of it that way, or they have baggage or bad experiences. So what about business as the common good? Like, how did that idea come to you, and what made you want to go and get that specialization in community economic development?
Yeah. I think it was reading stories, whether it was in the news or kind of in the, about the industry, if you want to call it that, of like impoverished downtowns where the communities like didn't even want to go to their own downtowns.
Right.
And how they turned themselves around by starting, one storefront at a time.
Yeah.
Right. Creating a sense of place where people actually wanted to be, which brought people to the town, which increased its vitality, which increased its business success, which made jobs for people, which put income in pockets, which solved people's problems. And now the same community began to thrive.
Right.
And, that was really by focusing on reestablishing local businesses. And, there were lots of examples of that. And it's a small thing, but I think that idea, because there's a lot more to it than that, but it really inspired me to say, I think there's something here. And, I know some folks bash corporations. I'm not one of those people, obviously.
I'm not either.
I think, businesses are just made out of people, right? And there are people who are doing good things, and there are people who are doing bad things.
Right.
The people who are doing good things and bad things at their homes, in their home life, they're being jerks. And there are people who are doing bad things running businesses, people doing good things running businesses.
And
you can't just lump everybody.
And we at Granite Goodness here, James, think that we focus too much on the bad actors. I think there's an inordinate amount of attention paid to that, almost to the point that it distorts someone's worldview, where they become so unaware of, actually, I think most people are pretty good, and they're nice, and you can probably trust them. That's my controversial That's my opinion.
Well, I'm with you on that, because if that wasn't true, I mean, you wouldn't be on the walk downtown. I mean, if everyone in every shop you went into was like looking to scam you and like dump toxic waste into the river,
it would
and like
be
it would be
anarchy,
like
right.
Mad Max, and it's not that.
Yeah.
There are people who don't do the right thing, and there's rules around that.
Right.
But most people, most businesses, they're trying to help.
Yeah. Yeah, they're law abiding. They're trying to grow. They're trying to serve their customers.
Yeah.
They're trying to build a good reputation in the community.
Exactly. So after going back to school, I ended up with a couple stops, I guess, on the way. But for the longest span, I was at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I want to get them on too.
Oh, you should. Yeah, it's a really cool organization. They're just down the street. But they serve all of New Hampshire. It's a nonprofit CDFI, which is a community development finance institution, meaning they believe that low-income people aren't necessarily poor just because of who they are, but it's that they don't have access to the tools they need to better themselves economically.
Right.
So they provide both loans and like technical assistance and education and training, whether it's for business loans or to take manufactured housing co-ops that are investor owned and turn them into co-ops. So you can get the appreciation of your real estate and have control over where you live.
The rocks, right? The resident owned.
Yes.
We're at 151, I think now.
I've lost count, right? It's so great.
Well, we do a little a Good News in New Hampshire newsletter as part of Granite Goodness, and that's always one of my favorite things to find is like, all right, look at this.
Yeah.
This is a really positive, and it doesn't just happen,
Exactly. So, I was there for almost 9 years. I was their senior lender on the business side. So working with employers who can't get quite what they need from the bank. Maybe they got most of what they need.
Right.
They've got a good plan. They're growing their companies, but just need a little more. So we would go in, not unlike what the BFA does, just focus it a little different way, but make them a loan and also kind of be their coach and assistant as they grow their business.
Right.
Because most folks are doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Right. And it was great. And then from there, I came here, and I've been here for actually about that long, 8 or 9 years now. So that's the path you were asking about.
And it's been the ride of your life.
It's a good time. Yeah.
So maybe now tell us a little bit about, I think people probably have a good idea, and I share a little bit in the intro to each episode of like who you are and what you do, but in your own words, what do you guys do here?
So the BFA's job is really twofold. One is to help businesses across the state, large and small, as well as nonprofit organizations, help them get access to the loan capital they need to grow and thrive.
Yeah.
The other thing we do is make sure that credit loans is available even in times of economic kind of distress or credit tightening, because you don't want to have a compounding effect of economy's going soft, no one's lending.
Right.
Makes the economy worse, which means no one lends even more, and it's just like this negative cycle. So, we have a bunch of tools that kind of help stabilize capital markets, as well as help lenders lend to companies that they want to lend to. Right? We're not, helping banks make loans that aren't going to repay. It's a business that they're like, yeah, these guys should get this loan. We really want to make this loan, but there's some regulation because it's a weird situation for this business or whatever that we just can't. Hey, BFA, can you help us? So we do that. There's a lot of different tools in the tool belt.
Yeah.
Well over 6,000 companies across New Hampshire have used the BFA.
Wow.
Yep, it's pretty wild. Several billion in capital has flown into New Hampshire companies through the BFA's
an
work.
Amount of money I can't even conceive. It sounds like a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot. And it's not like I don't have any billions at all.
Yeah.
But, our job is to use our tools to help private capital get where it wants to go.
Right.
And that's over 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Right. But it is a lot. The impact is pretty staggering over time. So, and there's some great stories. Right? We can I can give you a few examples.
I was just going to be my next question, right? I looked through your website a fair amount, and even right off the bat, like you've given some great examples already, but there's a pasta company that you helped relocate here. You guys gave a loan to a marketing agency in the White Mountains in the Conway area, which is actually where I live.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
I'm
I'm up in Tamworth.
Gotcha.
So I mean, it's just like, I love seeing those because it highlights people hear these kind of drier terms of like, credit, lending, bureau, blah, blah, blah. But then when I hear like, no, a pasta company got to come and expand their business here, that's an eye-catching thing, so tell me more of those stories.
How does it work?
Yeah.
Sure. And who uses it? So there's kind of three categories, right? There's people who need what I call small loans, right? And in the business world, that's $500,000 or less, but mostly it's like $50,000, $75,000. So we have something for that, and I'll give you some examples in a sec. But just so there's the small loans world, there's kind of the medium projects, people who are building a new, small or mid-sized manufacturing facility who need kind of 1 million to 5 million, maybe 8 million these days. But, for companies that have like 50 employees, good backbone, been around a long time kind of companies.
Right.
So it's sort of like medium stuff. And then there's the really big projects, right? BFA, we were just in the news late last year because, we were part of the team that brought New Balance into New Hampshire. And so we actually own that facility. We're building it. It's like a $75 million real estate development project, right? And so those get financed in a very particular way. So, but starting at the small side, we have a program called CAP, which creatively stands for Capital Access Program.
Yeah.
Although in true state fashion, it's actually in law as the CAP program, which means it's technically the Capital Access Program.
Okay.
So, which is like hilarious to me.
Capital Access Program.
Yeah, it's the Capital Access Program. Yeah, exactly. So this is a really cool thing. And I'll give you an example and then I'll tell you how it works. So a small entrepreneur or small loan to a new entrepreneur for Threshers Divers Surf Shop up by the Lakes region.
Yeah.
She was a kind of former Marine Corps corporal, wanted to establish the surf shop, selling boards and apparel, a lot of it self-designed, to the Lakes community.
Yeah.
Needed like $80,000 for inventory and startup. Went to the bank. The bank likes the plan. She knows what she's doing. It's a good one.
Right.
But that's not the kind of loan a bank can just make, right? They just can't.
Sure.
So they used the CAP program. And how the CAP program works is really neat. And very New Hampshire. So pretty much every bank participates. And when a bank joins CAP, the BFA sets up a bank account at that bank. So there's like these separate accounts across these banks.
Yeah.
Every time a bank makes a CAP loan, like say this surf shop, a small percentage of the loan goes into that bank account at that bank. We, the BFA, match that contribution. So we put money in that account.
Yeah.
And as the bank makes more CAP loans, that account gets a little bigger, a little bigger, a little bigger over time, just keeps growing.
Yeah.
And if any of that bank's CAP loans don't work out and they can't get repaid from the borrower, which is unfortunate, but it happens.
Right.
The bank can cover its loss from the CAP account that they've built over time. So it's this little like self-insurance pool that banks use. Each bank has their own for lending to small businesses and nonprofits. And it's done like thousands and thousands and thousands of loans all across the state. It's this juggernaut.
Right.
A little loan here, a little loan there, the coffee shop you go into in the morning, everything, the contractor who builds your deck.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And so, that's actually our busiest program. We do between 50 and 150 of those a year. It's people kind of, if you read about the BFA, you mostly see the headlines for the big projects we do, which is we're proud of.
Yeah.
But actually, most of what we do is like these small, one or 2, 3, 4 employee enterprises.
The meat and potatoes programs.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's so cool. I mean, it's such a great story, such a great program. Like, if you had told me how it works before I got here, I would have been like, that couldn't work. That doesn't make any sense.
Really?
Because one other thing about the PFA people don't know about is we're what's known as a independent state agency, meaning the state doesn't fund the BFA's activities. So we use no taxpayer money to do what we do. So, how do we get the money to make that match into those pools? Well, as it turns out, the pools have been around long enough that they're kind of big enough. I mean, they're not like, we're not talking billions or even hundreds, not that much, but they're big enough that the interest earnings on those pools throws off just enough back to us to cover our contribution back into the pool when someone needs to use it. And so it's this self-perpetuating model that doesn't need state funding and helps all across the state. It's like classic New Hampshire, right? It's so cool.
It's very you kind of bootstrapped,
totally,
a little bit.
Totally is.
Man, so what then? Like, help people understand what is the actual affiliation. Like, if you don't use taxpayer money, but you're, the New Hampshire Business Development, et cetera, what is your relationship to the state? Like, does that, you have special abilities that another kind of lender wouldn't have? Like, help explain that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So we are a state agency.
Okay.
But there's a group of agencies. We're not the only one who are known as independent state agencies or quasi-governmental entities. And, not to bore your listeners with like the technical details, but what that means
is why they listen.
Okay, cool. We are established by state law. We're in state statute that says like, here's your mission. Here are some things you can do. Here are your powers. Like, that's all in law.
Right.
But it also says like, you're on your own to go do it. Right. So we're limited in what we can do by the resources that we have. And we've been fortunate. We've been able to do a lot. Right. But it's all encapsulated in law. The mission of the organization, its existence is enabled by law. But New Hampshire is smart, in my opinion, in that they allow groups like us kind of latitude in how you get it done to go get it done. That way you can be like nimble and responsive to the business community and changing times and whatever. Yeah. So, if something's not working, we can just change it. Yeah. At the same time, if something doesn't work out, we have to bear those consequences. Sure. So it's a balancing act.
I feel like your example of the CAP program, and interestingly, you comment on it, right? Of like, had you read about it or known about it before going into it and really experiencing, the ways in which it works well, like that this may not be correct to describe it this way, but that tweak of, hey, people are kind of opting in at both ends of this to build a little bit of an insurance buffer, right? And that's a thing that wouldn't normally happen in a loan of this type. And I don't know, I like that because to me, it feels like an example of, and you could tell me how long this is, but like you never know, just tweaking something at the beginning. It's kind of like the novelty of investing, right? And that whole philosophy of, if you can just get something a little bit right, to create the right conditions in the beginning of a thing at its genesis, that can yield, really, really large things over time, right? And sometimes it's just about getting the right pieces in place.
Absolutely.
And you said, that program, the CAPS program, was a good fit for the scuba, retailer lady, because the bank, you said that she normally, like a bank normally wouldn't have been able to do a loan like that.
That's right.
Why is that? Like,
yeah, I mean, so banks are heavily regulated because they hold all of our deposits. Right. Right. So, the public needs confidence that the loans the banks are going to make are going to generally speaking, always get repaid.
Not speculating scuba
Right?
entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I mean, and she,
I'm sure she's great.
I don't think it actually was that speculative, and that's why the bank wanted to do it, right? But on paper, it's a new business, right? So there are a lot of rules around, who banks can lend to and under what circumstances, which unfortunately means some borrowers fall through the cracks.
Sure.
And one of the very common reasons that happens is the borrower doesn't have enough collateral, right? So they don't have enough personal assets that the bank can liquidate if the loan doesn't work out.
Right.
Bank loans require it because by regulation, they have to get their money back so they can give you your money when you show up to make a withdrawal, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. Like, we've seen what happens if, the banking system gets over its skis a little bit.
Right.
It's not good for, the world.
Yeah.
So, but they still want to help. So that's why they turn to programs like CAP and say, okay, if this doesn't work out the way we think, we still know that we'll be okay as a bank, and therefore we're permitted to make this loan.
Yeah. James, can you tell me a little bit about what are you proudest of in your work at the Finance Authority?
Sure. The BFA has been behind some of the biggest projects around the state in recent years. I mean, we're part of the team that brought in the BAE systems expansion into Manchester. Over 800 new jobs right in Manchester. Big employer, right? We just did the New Balance factory in Londonderry, right? Another couple hundred jobs. Made in USA, making shoes here in America, right?
In my hometown.
There you go, exactly.
You're welcome, Lancer Nation.
Those are jobs where, someone without a particularly advanced degree, right, can come in and make a lot of money for their family, right? But what people might not know, separate from those big projects, is the BFA was selected to be the administrator of something called the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which is SSBCI, boring acronym for an awesome program, which brought a lot of federal money into the BFA so then we could go lend it, like to Lily's Fresh Pasta, the pasta company we brought up from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So that program is very unique in how it works. It's a kind of partnership with banks. But what's really cool about it is when we look at the money we deployed through the program, like almost 70% of it went to what we call underserved communities and people, meaning minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned enterprises, and rural areas of the state.
Yeah.
So, in the last almost 2 years of that program, we've driven, I think it was over $130 million of capital into those communities, into new businesses, into expanding companies in, some of the smallest towns across New Hampshire. Some of the folks who, have great plans, but traditionally can't access the capital for one reason or another. We don't put our thumb on the scale to say like, okay, you're a woman-owned business, you're going to get preferential treatment. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
But when we look back at the impact, that's just where the money went, and that's really great.
Yeah. I will say in a recent Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, I put in there a story that I could look it up, but some ranking gave New Hampshire a very, very good score for friendliness to minority-owned businesses or something, which I was surprised by because, everyone knows we're not the most diverse state, racially and in all these ways. But I think that's a great story to tell,
Yeah. I mean, I think New Hampshire is unique in that if you have a good business and you're doing a good job, it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
And, everyone gets treated the same. And, the BFA isn't here to make businesses successful that aren't going to be successful. Yeah. We're just here to make sure the opportunity to be successful exists, right? And then the people who can capitalize on those opportunities do so. And it's great. Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about the history of this space? Because you've been in it a fair amount, you've studied it at a high level. I saw that this organization was formed in 1992. And even whatever's most interesting to you about that question, like you could talk about, but when you're future oriented in this space, like what does this world look like? The financing of small businesses and, making credit and opportunities available to entrepreneurs. Does it look really different 20 years from now, 50 years from now? Does it look really different today than it did in the beginning? Like, are there some big things that's changed about it? Anything in there that you want to talk about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, it looks very different than it used to. So the BFA started in 1992, but it actually was kind of a spin out of an agency that had been around, I think, since like the 50s or something, called the Industrial Development Authority, that would like go build industrial parks with bonds and like basically put concrete pads and fingers crossed a business will put up a new whatever shoe polish plant in the
some miracle
city.
Grow in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. I mean, different world in the 50s, right? You know, economic development will always depend on good infrastructure, right? I mean, you need water, you need sewer, you need roads, you need buildings, like, of course. But I do think if there's anything that came out of the pandemic was just a reawakening on how important workforce is as an asset for a state. You know, I mean, recruiting people has been the principal challenge for most businesses over the last couple of years. And so I think as we talk about in like the world of, you know, remote work and hybrid work, people kind of working from anywhere for certain kinds of companies, a state investing in its people as a capital asset, so to speak, just as they do in their wastewater treatment plants and roads and bridges and pipes and everything. Yeah. You know, that's going to be just a new pillar of economic development, is how do we invest in our people and the talent, people who live here, people who don't but work here. Right. You know, the kind of talent war, that I think that's just going to be a new part. That's a new part of the economic development landscape. And it's going to take a lot of different forms, right? Connectivity, lifestyle as part of your kind of brand as a state, right? You know, I mean, we administer the student loan forgiveness program for the regenerative medicine, you know, industry that's burgeoning in Manchester and elsewhere in the state. Just different tools to get the people. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an area where there's often, you know, there's a section of our newsletter that's economic news, and there's always really cool things happening with the Regen Hub, or what's
Regen Valley.
Regen Valley.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. You know, it's really cool. Like, I love looking at the whole picture of like different news in the state, and like every time I think we're gonna run out of good things, there's always more. You know, and there's always different. Like, you must feel the same way in your role. Just there's always new ideas and new people and folks who want to build stuff and do new things.
It's the beauty of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Right.
What that was? Oh, yeah. If you could talk to yourself at the beginning of your role here at the BFA, what would you say? Like, are there things you know now about this whole, you know, pipeline of capital and entrepreneurship that, you know, you've learned from your experience that you think would have been really helpful to understand when you first joined this organization?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, the organization has grown a lot since I've been here. I think it's actually, the organization has done a really good job. I think it's successful because it's set up well, you know, in kind of its bones and its statutory framework and its culture, and it's really focused on customer service and serving the people who use the programs, not kind of the internal institutionary needs, if that makes sense. You know, it's all about service. That's what it should be. Yeah. When I first started, you know, I took over for essentially like the founder, not technically, but the guy who had been here for 25 years. And the team had all been here the same or longer. Right. And so I was dealing with just this rolling wave of retirements. And that was pretty difficult to manage because they were good people, but they were retiring. And so having to replace them kind of at the same time, like you're rebuilding an airplane while it's flying. Right. if anything, this is maybe just more managerial lessons learned as opposed to like mission. I would.
That's about people, though, you know?
Yeah, I probably would have tried to onboard people sooner, you know, rather than kind of someone says, hey, I'm going to retire. Okay, now you go start a search.
Right.
Right. It's tricky because you don't want to make people feel like they're being pushed out the door because you don't want them to leave.
Yeah.
You're not pushing them at all. You want them to stay, if anything. At the same time, knowing people will leave when they retire, you know, there were kind of just gaps in our capacity when it was hard to hire, and when people would leave, and it stressed out the staff doing double duty.
Yeah.
Stressed me out doing triple duty.
Right.
So I think acting sooner on recruiting would have saved me a lot of pain, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlie Cummings said something similar. I asked him a similar question. He basically said, you know, I wish I'd learned to delegate more sooner. You know, I think a lot of the time people who lead organizations, you know, particularly if they're young organizations or they're kind of new into it, there's an instinct. Even I mean, you know, Granite Goodness is like pretty small potatoes, but the amount of pressure I feel to get little things right, you know, like in the beginning I was obsessing over, you know, this corner of my little logo, it's a huge deal. This is going to make or break. And now I'm like,
I was going to bring that up actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You're like, well, you know, it's quite unprofessional. It's not quite straight in the way. But you know, that comes like learning to anticipate needs and act on them sooner, and, you know, not really sweat the small stuff, I feel like is a good sign of growth and leadership, right?
Delegation is really hard. Especially if doing it yourself is what made you successful in your career to date, right? Like before I was the director here at the BFA, I mean, I was a lender, so,
right.
You know, and I think I was good at it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was meeting with the customer, assessing risk, assessing opportunity, helping the business, advising them. I would sit on boards of companies, help them grow, do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, because I was good at that, it led me to where I am now, where I am not the person who does that.
Right.
Right. So the things that made you successful in the past aren't the same skills that are going to make you successful in what you do next.
Right.
And I think that's a leadership transition that people go through, some successfully, some don't.
Right.
Delegation is really hard because you're used to doing it. You kind of consider yourself good at it.
Right.
You like doing it. That's why you were doing it.
Yeah.
And then you have to let it go. It's hard, but that is what it takes for sure.
My wife doesn't trust me to grocery shop, for example.
Oh, really?
No, not at all.
Oh, wow.
This is a micro example, but like, I don't know. There's so many vegetables. I struggle to tell them apart.
Oh, okay.
You know?
I love grocery shopping. I do. I love it.
That's good that you don't feel like you have to delegate it, you know, because otherwise, you know, someone else will get it wrong.
You know, what happens to me is, because I like to cook, is I get inspired when I grocery shop. And sometimes I make all the things I'm going to make. And a lot of times I don't. Because I get home, come home from work, we have a family,
right?
You know, and I'm like, oh, I actually like don't have 2 hours to skin and like press and salt these eggplants to make like really good eggplant lasagna or Parmesan or whatever I have in mind. I'm like, I have like 20 minutes to make dinner and then get my kid in the bath. Like, what was I even thinking?
Right.
You know, but that's, if I have a weak part, it's probably that.
No, I don't know.
The grocery store.
I mean, there's something nice about that of like I think it's better to, you know, to live with considering the possibility, right? Of like better to, I don't know. I'd much rather have a dad who's always like, I'm going to make this some crazy, cool, interesting thing and, you know, do it most of the time. And then every once in a while be like, you know what? It's chicken nuggets tonight, kids.
Absolutely.
And that's what.
Well, he's happy about that. He's 5. So, I think it's actually selfish of me. I'm just a glutton is what it comes down to. Sure. I think that was why I worked on the farm. I was like, ooh, delicious vegetables.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I just love food.
Is there a particular kind of cuisine that you like to, do you like Latin American food or
I
Asian
like Turkish food.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to go to Turkey for about 6 weeks, kind of in my late 20s on a professional exchange.
Yeah.
Where myself and 3 other folks from different kind of vocations went to Turkey as a group, and then 4 Turkish people came here as a group and sort of split up and lived in different parts of the country with families. And the food really stuck with me as much as anything else about how they just, like, they eat different foods at different times of the day. Like, there's spicy peppers and cheeses in your breakfasts,
Sure.
And so I like Turkish food. I like spicy food. I grow a lot of jalapenos at the house, and I pickle them, and I put them on everything, and like everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I like spicy.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. You didn't happen to visit any like ancient baths or something in Turkey?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, all
this is
sorts
like
of
a
stuff.
fantasy of mine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, we have a hot tub at my house, and it's like the thing I'm proudest of in the world, which is a little vain and silly, but but like,
sounds great.
There's like bathhouse culture.
Yeah.
This used to be a thing in a lot of societies, and it still is. And I feel like, well, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but there is a through line here, right? Of a theme we talk about often on the show is, the erosion of third spaces, in community, and, where can you go to interact with people that's not work or, whatever, right?
Your house.
Yeah, your house or something like that. And, used to be lots of places, and, there's more places all the time. People are aware of this, they're working on it. But, there's something about like, it's kind of like the public pool, there used to be public pools all over the place. And
Right.
I've heard that there are, baths and bathhouses in Turkey that are like, thousands of years old. And there's something really cool about that to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff in Turkey that's thousands of years old, and
Sure.
to them that's like not that big of a deal,
Right.
Because of how historic everything is. But yeah, the bathhouses are interesting. You go, you hang out. I mean, it's typically separated men and women, which is kind of a archaic tradition in some ways to my view. I mean, you're not naked in these places or anything.
Sure.
It's just like you're hanging out. But yeah, it's people go to gather. I think it's like somewhat now tourist-ish as much as it is like part of the enduring culture. But yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on Turkish culture, but I think like any developed nation, the erosion of the third place is a real thing.
Yeah.
But they still have those going on, and they have other things they do really well too.
Yeah.
Turkey is an interesting country. It's depending on where you go. Like you have the ultra urban kind of Istanbul area, and then you go, all the way east, and like you're basically, bordering Syria, right? And, you're Gaziantep, and it's like a totally different, arid, deserty kind of vibe,
it's
right?
An ancient, diverse
Yes.
place in all these different ways.
Yeah. I mean, it's as different from itself as like flying across the globe feels, right?
Right.
But it's in some ways that I thought that made it cool.
I'm sure there are people in the Turkish government who, would be interested. Like, this would be a great bathhouse conversation, right? Imagine you're there and you happen to be sitting next to the business development or like, I don't know, the economic tourism promotion person for, I'm sure they're all about that, in Turkey of like, hey, we have a balance, like a lot of, touristy economies or things, right? What's the balance of, attracting people to your region, to your place to spend money and, stimulate the economy versus, I don't know, making it lose its charm for the people who are there all the time, right?
I mean, we deal with that here.
It's peeper season.
I know. I mean, I was up north over the weekend, with the family. Just Storyland had like a Halloween thing, and my son loves Halloween and he loves Storyland, of course. So like, let's go up and we'll go and visit it.
You should stop by my farm the next time. We'll give you some eggs.
Okay, great.
Have a whole experience.
Yeah. It was jammed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Kank was jammed.
Yeah.
And people want to see it because it's beautiful. We want people to come see it.
Right.
Our tourism economy is very important. At the same time, you don't want the success to ruin the reason why people come to see it in the first place.
Right.
That's really hard. There's actually not a very good answer for that. I think New Hampshire does a good job of maintaining its beauty. I mean, we hiked the Flume. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of people go through that every day.
Right.
Not a piece of trash on the ground.
Yeah.
So I think it's about, hopefully people will respect the reason they're here to visit.
Yeah.
And not kind of ruin it on their way through.
Right.
You hope. That's what you hope for. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if, I'm sure other places and states, they deal with similar things. And, this I think is an aspect of your work that's really cool, of like the fact that you actually do talk to people in similar roles in other states of like, hey, here's the thing you do really well in New Hampshire. What's going on with that? Right. And, the management of tourism and all that is a never ending complicated question. Right. And I'm sure there's people who've thought really long and hard about it and, are working on.
If you talk to Commissioner Caswell at Business and Economic Affairs, travel and tourism is run by that group.
Okay.
And they would have a lot to say about this. Can I go back to something about the third space that you mentioned?
Of course.
So you've talked to a lot of people about this. I'm not an expert at the topic. No. So I'm going to pick your brain if you're okay. There are definitely fewer third spaces, or at least they're used differently. I mean, everything from like the old British pubs, which used to be that, or whatever, in different places in the world. How much do you think social media is kind of becoming that third place for people? And is that good? Right?
I don't know.
I mean, it kind of feels like, that's where you go. You're not at work. You're not at home. You're engaging with people at large.
Right.
Digitally.
Yeah.
Like that's a third place.
Right.
But it doesn't have the same, it's not at all the same as it is interacting in person, obviously.
It's not real life.
Right. Is it like filling a void but badly, maybe? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you my opinion on it, which is, limited to what my generational kind of perspective is, on the intersection of, sociality and technology. And I'm 29 for perspective. I would say yes. Like, I think for a lot of people it does do that, but I've observed, and again, this is a show about optimism. And so what I think is cool and interesting is, even in my own life, and I'm sure you've experienced or observed something similar too, of like, I didn't get a smartphone until I was 18, and I'm grateful for that. But everyone's different. That's fine. But like within 15 years, I've seen people my age go through kind of this whole full circle relationship with, technology and social media, almost, right? Where everyone was on, Facebook in high school, and it was really fun and interesting, and you poke people on their wall and, all this dumb stuff. That was really cool and fun at the time. But now I feel like people are much more intentional about, hey, we're on these sites, but what we're really interested in is this is a means to facilitate real life interaction, right? There's even a phrase that people use to comment on the overexposure of people to technology. If you think your friend is online too much and they're kind of losing their mind, you say to them, go touch grass.
Okay.
Like this is a real, phrase that's thrown around, fairly often by Gen Z and all that. And I'm not really Gen Z, but so I see the kind of counter reaction to like the chronic onlineness, and I'd like to think that a lot of people, and again, I'm not against technology, but when we all remember it's there to serve our needs, to complement the things that we want to do in life, not to take the place of those things, I think that's when we have the best and most fulfilling relationship with that. And I see people my age and younger people questing for that in real time.
Sure.
Even my younger sister, who's, I don't know, 21, you know, she's a junior at UNH, you know, when she's around her friends or when she's around family, like the phone's never out. And it didn't used to be that way. Like, you used to have the phone out and look at it and stuff, but now it's like, no. When we're all together, we put that away. It's too distracting and it's kind of disrespectful. So I don't know. It's evolving all the time, but that's just my personal experience with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not on social media.
Yeah.
Right. I also didn't have a smartphone when I was 18.
Right.
They weren't invented yet. So for me, it was easy. But but yeah, you know, it's, I think the third place is important in a community, you know, like you said, and, you know, for folks who are just listening to this episode, it's, you know, where do you go to forge human connections when you're not at work and you're not at home?
Or at church, right? Like that used to be a big,
exactly.
a lot of people.
Right. And, you know, I would agree. I think social media is probably a poor substitute for that, because I don't think it as effectively builds enduring connections with your local community.
Yeah.
Like the place you walk around and drive around with every day.
Right.
Right. So, you know, but I think in some ways, setting aside like kind of the addictiveness of some social media, I do think one of the reasons it's latched on is because people do yearn for a place to be where they can connect with other people.
Yeah.
And when we talk about the future of economic and community development, downtowns used to be all about retail and commerce.
Right.
Right. That's what made a downtown, all your shops, online shopping, everything. That world is like, it's not just changing. It changed a long time ago.
Yeah.
And you look at communities in New Hampshire that have been successful in revitalizing their downtown or keeping it vibrant. It's because they managed that transition from commerce being the kind of core of our downtown to cultural experiences.
Right.
Like think of Littleton, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's awesome shops. Like I went to Cheddar's over the weekend and got some candy. It was cool. Right. Yeah. But I think what Littleton has done so well is it's a cultural gathering place, right? There's things to do, not just places to shop.
Yeah.
And as we imagine the future of economic development and community development in our towns across the state, it's really focusing on that for our towns, that third space development that brings people together, gives a town life. I think we need more of it. And hopefully it'll mean we're all a little less zoned into our phones, which causes issues for people, right?
Yeah. So. No, that's a really good point to raise, you know, particularly as I mean, you know, we could have a whole episode about what does it mean to revitalize a rural town. And I know there's whole government programs that are designed to try and, you know, do all these things in rural communities. And it's a very relevant question for New Hampshire. Even, I mean, we joke, you know, we moved to Tamworth last year and, you know, it's an older community like New Hampshire, right? It's a pretty old state and there's the demographic challenge of that. But whenever other young people move to Tamworth, you know, we call it the Tamworthissance. And that might be offensive to like older folks who've lived there a long time. And, you know, we mean it lovingly, right? Of like, there's so much to appreciate here. And there's many towns like there's so much, you know, great culture and beauty and community. And like, just like you said, New Hampshire's a great place and there's a lot to enjoy and build.
It's true. I mean, I love it here. Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. And I think New Hampshire's future is very bright. You know, we do have demographic challenges. Mostly the whole country does, but actually mostly the world does. Any sort of developed nation experiences the same kind of aging dynamic that New Hampshire's. I mean, it's just people live longer, you know, that kind of thing. But and so it's not always really a bad thing. We're actually one of the faster growing states among key young demographics. Right. You know, east of the Mississippi, we have some of the fastest growing young people kind of population. So I think the future's bright. I'm optimistic.
I was going to say that's usually my closing question is what makes you optimistic for the future of your work? But you're hitting it already.
I'm lucky. Yeah, I mean, sure, demographics, I'm encouraged by that. But, you know, I'm lucky in that the slice of New Hampshire I get to see every day are businesses and nonprofits who are trying to grow and do new things. So, I mean, throughout over the years, I literally talked to thousands of people in New Hampshire who think the future is going to be brighter than today, in part because of what they're doing, their business, their organization. And I mean, there are just scores and scores of talented people who are going to be here for the long haul. And you think of like 40 years from now, we're talking about farming, all those seeds that those folks are planting when they grow and develop. I mean, New Hampshire has a lot more under the surface than people realize, which is probably one of the reasons you're doing this podcast, right?
Granite Goodness, baby.
Yeah, there you go. There's a ton of it. And I think New Hampshire's future is very bright because the people here are going to make it that way.
That's perfect. James, thank you so much for coming on Granite Goodness.
Sure, man. Thanks. Yeah, happy to be here.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.